The phone vibrated on my nightstand at 3:40 in the morning. For a moment, I stared at the glowing screen in the darkness, watching my daughter's name pulse with each ring. 22 years as a federal judge had trained me to wake instantly, to process information with clarity even in the middle of the night, but nothing could have prepared me for the sound of Isabelle's voice when I answered. "Mom." It came out broken, barely recognizable. "Mom, I'm at the police station." I was already sitting up, my hand reaching for the lamp. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Tristan hit me. The words were so quiet, I almost didn't hear them. Then louder, desperate. "He hit me, Mom. And now he's telling the police that I attacked him first. That I'm the one who—" Her voice cracked completely. "Dad's here. Dad believes him. He doesn't believe me." The world tilted. I heard the words, understood each one individually, but together they formed something my brain refused to process. Gregory was there? My ex-husband, Isabelle's father, was at the police station taking the side of the man who hit our daughter? "Where are you exactly?" My voice came out steady, controlled, the voice that had sentenced hundreds of criminals, the voice that never wavered. But inside, something was fracturing. "Beverly Hills Station. Mom, please come. I don't know what to do. The police are talking to Tristan and he's crying, and Dad keeps saying I need psychological help, that I've been unstable since the divorce, and nobody's listening to me. I'm coming right now. Don't say anything else to anyone until I get there. Do you understand me?" "Yes." A sob. "Mom, I'm so scared." "I know, baby. I'm leaving now." I hung up and sat there for exactly 5 seconds, allowing myself that brief moment of raw feeling. My daughter had been hit. My ex-husband was taking the abuser's side. Then I stood, pulled on jeans under my silk pajamas, grabbed my Burberry coat, and walked out to my car with my phone already dialing Victoria Strand. She answered on the second ring, alert despite the hour. 28 years of friendship meant she knew I wouldn't call at this time unless it was catastrophic. "Dominique? Isabelle's boyfriend hit her. She's at Beverly Hills Station. Gregory's there, backing the boyfriend's story that she attacked him first." Silence. Then, "I'm getting dressed now. Don't do anything without me there." "I'm not waiting." "I know. I'll be 15 minutes behind you." The drive from my house to the station normally took 30 minutes. I made it in 23. The streets were empty, the city asleep, and all I could think about was Isabelle's voice, that broken, terrified voice that sounded nothing like my confident, talented daughter. I thought about the hundreds of domestic violence cases I'd presided over, the patterns I knew so well, the way abusers always claimed self-defense, the way they cried convincingly for the police, the way they found people to corroborate their version of events. I'd seen it all from the bench. I'd sentenced men for it. I'd given speeches about it, but I'd never imagined I'd be driving through the night to find my own daughter living through it. When I pulled into the parking lot, I forced myself to take 3 deep breaths before getting out of the car. Emotion was useful, but only if channeled correctly. Right now, I needed to be the woman who'd spent 2 decades commanding courtrooms, not the terrified mother whose hands were shaking. The station's fluorescent lights were harsh after the darkness outside. I walked through the front doors and immediately scanned the waiting area. There was Isabelle, sitting on a bench against the far wall, her arms wrapped around herself. Even from across the room, I could see the marks on her neck, dark bruises in the unmistakable shape of fingers. My vision narrowed. Those marks told a story I'd seen too many times. Hands around a throat, squeezing. Attempted strangulation, one of the most lethal forms of domestic violence, one of the strongest predictors that an abuser would eventually kill. Then I saw Gregory. My ex-husband was standing near the front desk, gesturing animatedly to a police officer. He'd gained weight since the divorce. His expensive polo shirt stretched across a belly that hadn't been there 4 years ago. His hair was grayer, his face ruddier. He looked like what he was, a man who'd let himself go after losing the life he'd taken for granted. And next to the officer, sitting in a chair with his face in his hands, was a young man I'd never met. Tristan. He was crying, his shoulders shaking. Even from here, I could see the performance of it, the calculated nature of his distress. I'd watched too many manipulators in my courtroom not to recognize one. I walked toward Isabelle first. She looked up as I approached, and the relief that flooded her face nearly broke me. She stood, and I pulled her into my arms, feeling how badly she was trembling. "I've got you," I whispered. "I'm here now." "Mom, they're not listening." Tristan told them I went crazy when he tried to break up with me. He said I attacked him with my car keys. Dad's been telling them I've had emotional problems since you and he divorced, that I need psychiatric evaluation. I pulled back to look at her face. Besides the bruises on her neck, there was swelling near her left eye, a split in her lower lip. "Did they photograph your injuries?" "They took one picture. But the detective said it looks consistent with a mutual altercation." Mutual altercation. The words made my blood boil. I'd heard that phrase used to dismiss too many clear cases of assault. It was the lazy way out, the path of least resistance when an abuser was convincing enough. "Stay here," I said. "Don't move." I turned and walked toward the desk. Gregory saw me first, and I watched the color drain from his face. Good. He should be afraid. "Dominique," I held up one hand, cutting him off, and addressed the officer instead. "Detective Chen." Marcus Chen looked up from his notes, and I watched the recognition hit him like a physical blow. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened slightly, and he actually took a step backward. We'd crossed paths professionally 3 times. He'd testified in cases I'd presided over. He knew exactly who I was. "Judge Beaumont." His voice came out strained. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize that was my daughter sitting over there with strangulation marks on her neck?" I kept my voice level, professional, but there was steel underneath. "The same daughter whose injuries you classified as consistent with a mutual altercation?" The entire room had gone silent. Tristan had stopped crying and was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock mixed with something that might have been fear. Gregory had frozen in place. "I apologize," Chen said, and I could see sweat forming on his forehead. "I didn't know she was your—" "My daughter's name is Isabelle Beaumont. You took her statement. You saw her identification. You didn't think to make that connection." "No, ma'am. I'm sorry. I want to see everything. All statements, all photographs, all evidence you've collected. And I want to know exactly what led you to determine this was anything other than a clear case of assault." Chen glanced at Tristan, then at Gregory, then back to me. "The gentleman here, Mr. Ashford, gave a very detailed account of the incident. He said Ms. Beaumont became erratic when he attempted to end their relationship, that she attacked him first with her keys, and he was defending himself. Mr. Beaumont, her father, corroborated that his daughter has been experiencing emotional difficulties." I turned to look at Gregory. "My ex-husband couldn't meet my eyes." "You told them our daughter is emotionally unstable?" "Dominique, you don't understand. Tristan called me tonight. He was distraught. He said Isabelle had—" "He called you? The man who's been dating our daughter for 8 months called you in the middle of the night before calling the police?" Gregory's mouth opened and closed. He had no answer. I looked back at Chen. "My daughter needs medical attention. Those strangulation marks need to be properly documented by a forensic nurse, not your single photograph. I want her taken to Cedars-Sinai immediately." "Of course, Judge Beaumont. Right away. And while we're arranging that, I want to know what evidence you have besides Mr. Ashford's tearful testimony. Did you check his hands? Did you document any defensive wounds on my daughter? Did you ask about the history of their relationship? Did you speak to any witnesses? Did you do anything besides listen to a man cry and believe him?" The silence that followed was damning. Chen's face told me everything I needed to know. He'd done the bare minimum, if that. He'd seen a well-spoken young man in emotional distress, heard a father expressing concern about his daughter's mental health, and made assumptions. The same assumptions that got made in cases like this every single day. The same assumptions I'd spent 2 decades fighting against from the bench. "I'm calling my attorney," I said. "She'll be here in approximately 10 minutes. Until then, my daughter is not answering any more questions, and I want Mr. Ashford's belongings secured as evidence. His phone, particularly. I'm quite familiar with how these cases work, Detective. I know the patterns, I know the tactics, and I know what proper procedure looks like." Tristan stood up then, and for the first time, I got a good look at him. He was tall, well-dressed, even at 4 in the morning, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of money and education. Handsome in a conventional way, with blonde hair and blue eyes that probably made him seem trustworthy. But I'd sentenced handsome, well-spoken men before. Appearance meant nothing. With all due respect, he said, his voice still thick with tears, I think Judge Beaumont's relationship to Isabelle creates a conflict of interest here. I'm the victim in this situation, and I have a right to— You have the right to remain silent, I said, cutting him off. And if you're intelligent, you'll exercise it. Because every word you say right now is being remembered by someone who spent 22 years prosecuting and sentencing people exactly like you. His face changed. The tears dried up instantly, and for just a moment, I saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. Then the mask came back. The vulnerable victim returned, but I'd seen the truth underneath. Gregory moved toward me. Dominique, please, you're making this worse. Isabelle needs help. She's been struggling since the divorce, and Tristan has been nothing but patient with her. Tonight she just snapped and— Stop talking. I turned to face him fully. Our daughter has strangulation marks on her neck. She has a split lip. She has bruising around her eye. And you're standing here defending the man who did that to her because he called you crying first? Because he told you a story that confirmed what you wanted to believe about me ruining her life? That's not— 4 years, Gregory. 4 years since our divorce, and you're still so consumed with resenting me that you can't see what's right in front of you. He played you. He found your weakness, and he exploited it. And you let him, because being right about me being a bad mother was more important than protecting our child. The door opened, and Victoria walked in, her briefcase in hand, looking every inch the formidable attorney she was, despite having clearly dressed in under 5 minutes. She took in the scene with one sweeping glance, then walked directly to me. Fill me in, she said quietly. I gave her the summary in under a minute. Isabelle's call, the claims of mutual combat, Chen's inadequate investigation, Gregory's betrayal, Tristan's performance. Victoria's expression grew harder with each detail. Right, she said when I finished. She turned to Chen. Detective, I'm Victoria Strand, attorney for Isabelle Beaumont. I want my client taken for proper medical evaluation immediately. I want all of Mr. Ashford's belongings, particularly his phone, secured as evidence. I want the names of any other officers who responded to this call. And I want a full report of your investigation process, because what Judge Beaumont has described to me sounds like a textbook failure of proper procedure in a domestic violence case. Chen nodded, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Yes, ma'am. I'll arrange for Ms. Beaumont's transport to the hospital right now. I walked back to Isabelle, who was watching everything with wide eyes. She'd stopped trembling quite as badly, but I could see the shock settling in, that distant look that trauma brings. You're going to the hospital, I told her gently. Victoria and I are coming with you. They're going to document everything properly this time, and then we're going to make sure this is handled correctly. What about Dad? She whispered. I glanced back at Gregory, who was standing alone now, looking lost. Your father made his choice tonight. He chose to believe a man he barely knows over his own daughter. That's something he's going to have to live with. He really doesn't believe me, does he? Her voice was so small, so hurt. No, baby, he doesn't, but I do. And we're going to make sure everyone else does too. I met Gregory Beaumont 33 years ago at a charity fundraiser in downtown Los Angeles. I was 23, fresh out of law school, working 16-hour days as a junior prosecutor with something to prove. He was 26, charming and confident, running his father's real estate development company with the kind of easy assurance that comes from never having to worry about money. He walked up to me at the bar, made some joke about lawyers I can't even remember now, and somehow we talked for 3 hours straight. We were married 18 months later. I wore my mother's veil and carried white roses, and I genuinely believed we'd build something lasting together. For a while, it seemed like we had. Gregory was supportive when I worked late, proud when I won cases, encouraging when I started talking about my ambitions for the bench. We bought a house in Beverly Hills, the kind of place I'd dreamed about growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Echo Park. When Isabelle was born 3 years into our marriage, I thought our life was perfect. But perfection is an illusion, and illusions don't survive under pressure. I made junior prosecutor at 25, senior prosecutor at 29. By 35, I was handling major cases, organized crime, white-collar fraud, and increasingly violent crimes against women. I won a high-profile domestic violence case that got national attention when I was 36. The defendant was a prominent surgeon who'd put his wife in the hospital 3 times, always with explanations about her being clumsy or accident-prone. I prosecuted him with everything I had, and when the jury came back guilty, I felt something click into place. This was my calling. These cases, these women who needed someone to fight for them. 2 years later, I was appointed to the federal bench. At 38, I was one of the youngest federal judges in California. The confirmation hearings were brutal. They always are for women. But I made it through. Gregory threw me a party, invited 200 people, gave a speech about how proud he was. I remember standing there in our living room, surrounded by colleagues and friends, thinking I had everything. I didn't see the resentment building. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. The judgeship changed everything. The hours were long, the cases demanding. I specialized in violent crimes, particularly those involving women and children. I became known for harsh sentences when the evidence warranted it, for not accepting excuses or sob stories from defendants who'd brutalized their families. The press called me the Iron Judge. Some defense attorneys called me worse. But victims' advocates called me a hero, and that mattered more. Gregory's business was growing too. He was developing luxury condos and commercial properties all over Southern California. We were both successful, both busy, both consumed by our careers. Isabelle grew up with nannies and private schools, with parents who loved her but were rarely home for dinner. I told myself it was fine, that we were modeling success for her, that quality time mattered more than quantity. I was wrong about a lot of things. The cracks really started showing after the 2008 financial crisis. Gregory's business took a massive hit. He wasn't prepared for it, hadn't diversified or protected himself. He lost millions in a matter of months. Not everything. We were still wealthy by any standard, but enough that his ego took a beating it never recovered from. He started drinking more, started making comments about how my government salary wasn't exactly saving us, started saying things about how maybe if I'd been more present, more supportive, more of a real wife, he wouldn't have made the mistakes he made. I was presiding over increasingly difficult cases during those years. I sentenced a man to 25 years for nearly killing his girlfriend. I sentenced another to life for murdering his ex-wife in front of their children. I listened to victim impact statements that haunted my sleep. I carried the weight of women's trauma home with me every night, and I had no capacity left for Gregory's resentment. Isabelle was in high school then, a bright, sensitive girl who loved architecture and art. She noticed the tension between her parents, even when we thought we were hiding it. I found out later that Gregory had started confiding in her, telling her things about our marriage that no father should tell his teenage daughter, planting seeds of doubt about me, about whether I'd chosen my career over our family, about whether I was cold and unfeeling. I didn't know he was doing that until much later, until it was too late to undo the damage. The real end came 4 years ago, when Isabelle was 23 and just starting her architecture career. I came home early one afternoon, a rare occurrence, and found Gregory in our bedroom with his secretary. She was 28, blonde, everything you'd expect from the cliché. They scrambled to get dressed, and Gregory had the audacity to blame me for it. Said I'd been emotionally absent for years, that he'd felt alone in our marriage, that this had been going on for 6 months and I hadn't even noticed. He was right about one thing. I hadn't noticed. I'd been too consumed with a particularly brutal case involving child abuse, too focused on making sure the defendant got the maximum sentence, too buried in other people's trauma to see my own marriage disintegrating. I filed for divorce the next day. Victoria handled it, and it was ugly. Gregory fought for everything, despite being the one who'd cheated. He claimed I'd neglected our marriage, that my career obsession had driven him to infidelity, that he deserved more than half of everything because he'd supported my career by being the primary emotional parent to Isabelle. That last claim would have been laughable if it hadn't been so painful. He'd barely been present in Isabelle's life beyond writing checks and showing up for school events when convenient. The divorce took 8 months and cost Gregory $4.2 million when it was finally settled. I kept the house, the bulk of our investments, everything I'd carefully protected over the years. He walked away with enough to live comfortably, but not lavishly, and his ego never recovered. The secretary left him 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Apparently, dating a wealthy married man was more appealing than being with a bitter divorced one. Isabelle was caught in the middle of it all. She'd seen the infidelity, heard the arguments, sat through awkward dinners where we tried to be civil and failed. She was angry at both of us, but didn't know how to express it. She withdrew, focused on her work, started building walls around her emotions that looked disturbingly familiar to me. After the divorce, I threw myself even harder into my work. I lectured at law schools about domestic violence prosecution. I consulted on high-profile cases. I started planning a foundation to train law enforcement on recognizing manipulation tactics in abuse situations. I told myself I was honoring my life's work, preparing for retirement at the top of my game. What I was really doing was avoiding the uncomfortable truth that I'd failed at the most important relationship in my life, the one with my daughter. Isabelle and I loved each other. I never doubted that, but we didn't know how to talk to each other. Our conversations were surface level, updates about work and polite questions about each other's lives. She never told me when she was struggling, never asked for help with her own emotional processing of the divorce. And I never pushed, never admitted my own guilt about how our family had fallen apart, never showed her the vulnerability that might have opened the door to real connection. I retired from the bench 6 months ago at 56, earlier than I'd planned, but I was tired. Tired of carrying other people's pain. Tired of the weight of judgment. Tired of going home to an empty house every night and wondering where the years had gone. I had more money than I needed, a reputation that would last, and a daughter who called me once a week out of duty rather than genuine connection. Gregory had been seeing Isabelle more regularly since the divorce, though I suspected it was more about having someone to complain to about me than genuine paternal interest. She never talked to me about their relationship, and I didn't ask. I figured she needed her father, even if he was flawed. I never imagined he'd use their relationship to poison her against me, to make her doubt herself, to leave her vulnerable. Isabelle mentioned Tristan for the first time about 8 months ago, just casually over lunch. She'd met someone at a networking event. He seemed nice. They'd been on a few dates. I asked the basic questions any mother would ask. What did he do? Where was he from? Was he treating her well? She said he was a cryptocurrency trader, very successful, very attentive. She seemed happy, and I was glad. I wanted her to have what I hadn't, a relationship built on genuine connection rather than ambition and convenience. Over the following months, she mentioned him occasionally. They were getting serious. He was understanding about her demanding work schedule. He'd met her friends. Everything sounded normal, healthy. I never met him. She didn't offer, and I didn't push. I told myself she was an adult, that she didn't need her mother vetting her relationships. I should have pushed. I should have insisted on meeting him, on getting to know him, on being more involved in her life. But I didn't, because our relationship had settled into a pattern of polite distance, and breaking that pattern would have required vulnerability I wasn't ready to show. 3 weeks ago, Isabelle called and asked if we could have lunch. She sounded strained, and I thought maybe she was finally ready to talk about something real. But when we met, she was distracted, checking her phone constantly, jumping every time it buzzed. I asked if everything was okay, and she said yes, just work stress. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because acknowledging that something was wrong would have meant acknowledging how little I actually knew about my daughter's life. That was 3 weeks ago. And tonight, I'd driven through the dark to find her at a police station with bruises on her neck, while her father took the side of the man who'd put them there. Sitting in the hospital waiting room while Isabelle was being examined by the forensic nurse, I felt the full weight of every choice I'd made over the past 30 years. Every late night at the office, every case I'd prioritized over a school event, every emotional wall I'd built to protect myself from the pain of my work, walls that had also kept out my own daughter. Every assumption that being strong meant never showing weakness, never admitting fear, never asking for help. I'd spent 22 years advocating for women who'd been hurt by the men in their lives. I'd sentenced hundreds of abusers. I'd given speeches about recognizing the signs, about believing victims, about the patterns of manipulation and control. And I'd missed every single sign that my own daughter was living through exactly what I'd spent my career fighting against. The forensic nurse who examined Isabelle was a woman named Patricia Rodriguez, mid-40s with kind eyes and steady hands. She'd done this work for 15 years, and I could see the weight of it in her face. She took photographs of every bruise, every mark, documented everything with clinical precision. When she finished, she came out to the waiting room where Victoria and I had been sitting in silence for 40 minutes. "The injuries are consistent with manual strangulation," Patricia said quietly. "Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, bruising on the anterior neck with clear finger patterns, defensive wounds on her forearms. There's also blunt force trauma to the left orbital area and a laceration on the lower lip. These injuries are not consistent with self-defense. They're consistent with assault." I felt Victoria's hand find mine and squeeze. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Can we see her?" "She's getting dressed. She's also in shock, which is normal. She'll need follow-up care, probably therapy. Strangulation cases have high rates of PTSD. I nodded. I knew the statistics. I'd cited them in sentencing hearings dozens of times. Strangulation is one of the most significant predictors of future homicide in domestic violence cases. Women who are strangled by their partners are 7 times more likely to eventually be killed by them. I'd sent men to prison for decades based on those numbers. Now they were about my daughter. Isabelle came out wearing a hospital gown under her jacket, her own clothes bagged as evidence. She looked small, younger than 27, lost. I stood and she walked straight into my arms. "I want to go home," she whispered. "Not my apartment, your home. Can I stay with you?" "Of course, as long as you need." We drove back to my house as the sun was starting to rise. Victoria followed in her own car. Isabelle sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, not speaking. I didn't push her to talk. There would be time for that later. At home, I got her settled in the guest room, her old bedroom from before the divorce, though I'd redecorated it after she moved out. Victoria made coffee in the kitchen, and when Isabelle finally fell asleep, the 3 of us sat at the kitchen table and started planning. "The medical evidence is solid," Victoria said, flipping through her notes. "Patricia's documentation is thorough. We have clear strangulation injuries, defensive wounds, evidence of significant force. Any competent prosecutor will see this as a slam-dunk assault case." "Gregory's statement complicates things," I said. "He'll testify that Isabelle has been emotionally unstable, that she initiated the violence. A defense attorney will use that to create reasonable doubt. Then we need to understand why Gregory would say that. What's his relationship with Tristan?" That was the question I'd been asking myself since the police station. Gregory was many things: resentful, ego-driven, emotionally stunted, but he loved Isabelle in his own inadequate way. What would make him side with a man who hurt her? My phone rang. It was Marcus Chen from the police department. "Judge Beaumont, I wanted to update you. We've secured Mr. Ashford's phone as evidence. He initially refused to surrender it, which made us suspicious. We're getting a warrant to search it." "Good. What about his statement? Did he lawyer up?" "Not yet. He's still maintaining that Ms. Beaumont attacked him first. But Judge, there's something you should know. Mr. Ashford made several calls tonight before calling 911. One was to Mr. Gregory Beaumont. That call lasted 18 minutes. 18 minutes. Tristan had called Gregory before calling the police. That meant he'd planned this, set the narrative up before law enforcement was even involved. What did they talk about? We don't know yet, but it explains why Mr. A. Beaumont arrived at the station so quickly and was already supporting Mr. Ashford's version of events. After I hung up, I told Victoria what Chen had said. She leaned back in her chair, thinking. He called Gregory first to establish his story. He needed an ally, someone who would corroborate the narrative of Isabelle being unstable. Gregory was the perfect choice. Bitter ex-husband with a grudge against you, distant father who could be convinced his daughter inherited her mother's supposed coldness. But why would Tristan need that level of manipulation? If he was going to hit her, why go through all this planning? Victoria gave me a long look. Because this wasn't spontaneous, Dominique. This was calculated. Men who call witnesses before calling police aren't acting in the heat of the moment. They're covering their tracks. The implications of that settled over me like ice water. This wasn't a fight that got out of hand. This was premeditated, or at least quickly strategized, which meant Tristan was more dangerous than a simple abuser. He was intelligent, manipulative, and forward-thinking. Over the next few days, we started gathering information. Victoria hired a private investigator named James Mitchell, a former FBI agent who specialized in background checks. What he found made my blood run cold. Tristan Ashford came from money, or at least his family had before his father lost most of it in 2008. He'd grown up in Connecticut, attended good schools, worked in finance before moving into cryptocurrency trading. On paper, he looked successful and stable. But when James dug deeper, a pattern emerged. 3 ex-girlfriends over the past 8 years. All relationships lasted 6 to 10 months. All ended abruptly, with the women cutting off contact. James tracked down 2 of them who were willing to talk off the record. The first was a woman named Sarah Chen, 32, living in Seattle. She dated Tristan 4 years ago when he was working in tech in San Francisco. He was perfect at first, she told James over the phone, with me listening on speaker. Attentive, romantic, always knowing exactly what to say. But around month 3, things started changing. He needed to know where I was all the time. He'd get upset if I made plans without him. He isolated me from my friends gradually, making little comments about how they didn't really care about me like he did. Did he ever get physical? James asked. Once. We were arguing because I'd gone to lunch with a male colleague, and he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. Then he cried, said he was so sorry, that he just loved me so much it made him crazy. I left the next day. He sent me hundreds of texts, showed up at my work. I had to threaten a restraining order to make him stop. The second ex-girlfriend was Amanda Price, 29, living in Denver. Her story was nearly identical. Perfect beginning, gradual control, isolation from friends and family. She'd ended it when he'd pushed her during an argument, and she'd fallen, hitting her head on a coffee table. He didn't call an ambulance, Amanda said. He stood there crying, saying it was my fault for making him so upset. I had a concussion. I told him if he didn't leave immediately, I'd call the police. He left, but not before taking my laptop and phone with him. He said he needed to protect himself in case I tried to lie about what happened. I never got them back. Neither woman had filed police reports. Both had been too scared, too manipulated, too convinced that somehow it was partially their fault. It was the same story I'd heard hundreds of times in my courtroom, and it never got easier to hear. He has a type, Victoria said after we'd listened to both interviews. Successful women with their own careers, usually with some kind of family complication or vulnerability he can exploit. Sarah had just lost her mother. Amanda was estranged from her father. And Isabelle has divorced parents and a strained relationship with both of us, I finished. He saw the weakness and went for it. When Isabelle woke up that afternoon, I asked her to tell me everything about her relationship with Tristan. She sat curled up on my couch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm California day, and talked for over an hour. They'd met at an architecture industry networking event 8 months ago. He'd approached her, said he was interested in investing in real estate development and wanted to understand the design side better. They talked about her work, her passion for sustainable architecture. He seemed genuinely interested, asked intelligent questions. When he asked for her number, she'd been flattered. The first few months were amazing, she said, her voice quiet. He was so attentive. He remembered everything I said. He'd send flowers to my office, plan these elaborate dates. I felt special, like someone actually saw me. When did things change? Gradually. So gradually, I didn't notice at first. He started commenting on my clothes, saying things like, "Are you really wearing that to meet my friends?" Or, "I love you in dresses, you should wear them more." Then it was my friends. He'd make jokes about how shallow they were, how they didn't understand me like he did. I started declining invitations because it was easier than dealing with his mood afterward. "Did he ever meet your father?" Isabelle nodded. About 4 months in. I was nervous about it, but Tristan insisted. They met for dinner, and afterward, Tristan said Dad had told him all about the divorce, about how you'd destroyed the family with your career obsession. He said Dad was worried about me inheriting your emotional problems. I was so hurt, Mom. I confronted Dad about it later, and he said Tristan misunderstood, but he didn't deny saying negative things about you. My heart ached. Gregory had always blamed me for the divorce, but I hadn't realized how much he'd poisoned Isabelle against me. And Tristan had seen that vulnerability, that daughter desperate for her father's approval, and exploited it. When did he first hurt you physically? She was quiet for a long time. 6 weeks ago, we were arguing because I'd mentioned wanting to take a solo trip to visit a college friend in Boston. He said I was trying to get away from him, that I must be cheating. He grabbed my wrists and squeezed until I promised I wouldn't go. I had bruises for a week. I wore long sleeves to work. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. Because I spent my whole life hearing about how you're this strong woman who takes down abusers, and I couldn't even recognize one when I was dating him. Because I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was inheriting your inability to maintain relationships. The words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter had been suffering, had been abused, and she'd been too ashamed to tell me because she thought she was failing to live up to some standard I'd set, because she'd internalized Gregory's narrative that I was cold and unfeeling and impossible to live with. Isabelle, none of this is your fault. Not the abuse, not missing the signs, none of it. These men are experts at manipulation. They find your vulnerabilities and exploit them. That's what they do. But you would have seen it. You're trained to see it. I didn't see it either, I interrupted. You mentioned him a few times, said you were happy, and I didn't push for details. I didn't ask to meet him. I didn't stay involved in your life enough to notice the changes. If anyone failed here, it was me. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. I almost called you so many times. There were moments when I knew something was wrong, when I could feel it. But every time I picked up the phone, I heard Dad's voice in my head saying, you were too busy, too important, too focused on your career to care about my problems. I'm so sorry, I said, and my own tears started falling. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I let work consume me. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to maintain our relationship after the divorce. I'm sorry for all of it. We held each other and cried, years of distance and hurt finally breaking open between us. It was the most honest conversation we'd had since she was a child. Later that evening, Victoria came back with more information. James had pulled Tristan's financial records, legally, through a subpoena related to the assault case. He's broke, Victoria said, spreading papers across my dining room table. Not just struggling, completely underwater. He lost $470,000 in bad cryptocurrency investments over the past 6 months. He's maxed out on credit cards, behind on his car payment, about to be evicted from his apartment. When did he find out who Isabelle's mother was? I asked. Victoria checked her notes. Based on social media activity and searches James found, approximately 4 months into the relationship. That's when things shifted. He started researching you, your career, your net worth, your properties. He looked up the divorce settlement, found out exactly how much you're worth. So he was using Isabelle to get to my money. It looks that way. And when she started pulling away, because she wasn't she? I looked at Isabelle, who nodded. I told him 2 weeks ago that I needed space, that things were moving too fast. He completely lost it. That's when he started getting more aggressive. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced, call me 50 times a day. I was scared to break up with him completely because I didn't know what he'd do. The picture was becoming clearer and horrifyingly familiar. Tristan had targeted Isabelle specifically because of her family connections. He'd manipulated Gregory into being an ally, probably with some sob story about loving Isabelle despite her emotional problems. He'd isolated Isabelle from her support system, particularly from me. And when she'd tried to leave, he'd escalated to violence. There's more, Victoria said grimly. James found audio recordings on Tristan's phone. Conversations with Isabelle, edited to make her sound aggressive and unstable. He's been building a defense case for weeks, maybe months. This wasn't a spontaneous assault. He planned for the possibility that she'd try to leave, and he'd need to discredit her. I felt sick. This level of premeditation, this calculated cruelty, it was beyond typical domestic violence. This was a predator who'd studied his victim, identified her weaknesses, and built an entire strategy around exploitation and control. What about Gregory? I asked. How deep is his involvement? Victoria pulled out another document. Bank transfer. $50,000 from Gregory to Tristan 3 weeks ago. The memo line says, investment opportunity. I stared at the paper. My ex-husband had given Tristan $50,000. He was buying into Tristan's victim narrative. Tristan must have told him he needed money, made up some story. And Gregory saw it as a way to be the good father, the provider, everything he accused me of preventing him from being. Should we confront him? Victoria asked. Yes, but not yet. First, I want to know exactly what Tristan told him, what promises were made, how deep this conspiracy goes, because that's what this is, a conspiracy to isolate and control my daughter, with her own father as an unwitting accomplice. Over the next week, the case built momentum. The district attorney, my former colleague Robert Morrison, took it personally. He'd worked with me for years, respected me, and was outraged by what had happened. He charged Tristan with aggravated assault, strangulation, and making false statements to police. The bail was set at $200,000, which Tristan couldn't make, but Gregory could, and 3 days after the charges were filed, he posted Tristan's bail. When I found out, I drove straight to Gregory's condo in Marina del Rey. He answered the door in a golf shirt and khakis, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. I knew you'd come, he said wearily. You posted his bail. You gave $200,000 to the man who strangled our daughter. He didn't strangle her, Dominique. It was a fight that got out of hand. He's devastated about what happened. I stared at my ex-husband, this man I'd spent 24 years of my life with, and realized I didn't know him at all. Or maybe I'd always known him and just hadn't wanted to see it. Come inside, he said. Let me explain. I followed Gregory into his condo, a place I'd never been before. It was smaller than our old house, decorated in that generic bachelor style that suggested he'd hired someone to make it look acceptable. Empty beer bottles cluttered the coffee table, and the whole place had the stale smell of someone who'd given up on impressing anyone. Do you want something to drink? He asked, heading toward the kitchen. No. I want you to explain why you posted bail for the man who assaulted our daughter. Gregory poured himself a scotch, his hands shaking slightly. Tristan came to me 2 months ago. He said he loved Isabelle, wanted to marry her, but he was going through a rough patch financially. Some investments had gone bad. He asked if I could help him get back on his feet so he could properly provide for our daughter. He was so earnest, so respectful. He reminded me of myself at that age. So you gave him $50,000. I wanted to be the father who helped, the one who was there when it mattered. You always said I wasn't present enough, that I didn't support Isabelle properly. Here was my chance to actually do something meaningful. He manipulated you, Gregory. He researched our family, found your weaknesses, and exploited them. That money is gone. He's not investing it. He lost it gambling on cryptocurrency. Gregory's face tightened. You don't know that. I have his financial records. Victoria subpoenaed them. He's in debt up to his neck, and your $50,000 went straight into covering his losses. He used you. Even if that's true, it doesn't mean he intentionally hurt Isabelle. He called me that night in tears, said she'd attacked him when he tried to break things off. He sounded terrified, Dominique. What was I supposed to do? Not believe him? You were supposed to believe your daughter. My voice rose despite my attempt at control. She called you from a police station with bruises on her neck, and you took his side. He called you before he called 911, Gregory. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you? He set up his alibi before reporting the crime. Or he called someone he trusted because he was scared and confused. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He has strangulation marks on her neck that match his hands. He has a pattern of abusive behavior with ex-girlfriends. He has edited audio recordings of Isabelle that he'd been saving to use against her. This isn't confusion. This is premeditation. Gregory set his glass down hard enough that liquid sloshed over the rim. You know what I think? I think you can't stand that Isabelle had a relationship with a man I approved of. A man who came to me for advice, who treated me like I mattered. You've spent 4 years making me feel irrelevant in our daughter's life. And now that she found someone who respected me, you're using your legal connections to destroy him. The accusation was so absurd, so detached from reality, that I almost laughed. Almost. You think this is about you? About your ego? Gregory, our daughter was nearly killed. Strangulation is the #1 predictor of future homicide in domestic violence cases. If she hadn't gotten away, if she hadn't made it to that police station, Tristan could have killed her. You're being dramatic. It was one fight. It's never one fight. It's a pattern, and the pattern always escalates. I know this because I spent 22 years sentencing men exactly like him. I've read the autopsy reports of women whose partners strangled them just once before eventually killing them. I've listened to children testify about watching their fathers kill their mothers after years of abuse that everyone dismissed as just fights. This is what I know, Gregory. This is my expertise, and you're choosing to believe a con artist over me because your pride is more important than our daughter's life. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his drink. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter but no less stubborn. Tristan showed me the recordings. Isabelle sounds unstable in them, aggressive, irrational. Maybe she does have the emotional problems I've been worried about. Maybe she needs help, not legal action against someone who was trying to protect himself. Those recordings are edited. We have the originals, and they tell a completely different story. He manipulated the audio to make her sound like the aggressor. That's not confusion or self-defense. That's calculation. You would say that. You need her to be the victim so you can be the hero, swooping in to save her. Just like you always needed to be the hero in your courtroom, sentencing men to prove how tough you were. And there it was, the real resentment, the poison that had been building for years. Is that what you think I was doing? Proving something by protecting women from violent men? I think you were so obsessed with being important that you forgot how to be human. You forgot how to be a wife, how to be a mother. Isabelle grew up scared of disappointing you because you were always so perfect, so strong, so untouchable. And now you're surprised that she ended up with someone who actually showed emotion, who wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. Tristan isn't vulnerable, Gregory. He's a predator who uses fake vulnerability as a weapon. And you fell for it because you were so desperate to be relevant in Isabelle's life that you couldn't see the truth right in front of you. Get out, he said quietly. Not until you tell me everything. What else did Tristan tell you? What promises did he make? Gregory laughed, a bitter sound. He promised me I'd be part of Isabelle's life again, that when they got married, I'd be welcomed back into the family properly, that he'd help heal the rift between us. He said you'd driven a wedge between me and my daughter, but he could fix it. And I wanted to believe him, Dominique. I wanted so badly to believe that I could have my daughter back. The pain in his voice was real, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. But then I remembered Isabelle's face at the police station, the bruises on her neck, the terror in her eyes when she'd called me. Whatever pain Gregory felt was nothing compared to what he'd put our daughter through by choosing his ego over her safety. Tristan played you, I said. Every word, every promise, every tearful phone call. It was all manipulation. And you let him, because being right about me being a bad mother was more important than protecting the daughter you claim to love. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Gregory. What's not fair is that Isabelle is traumatized and scared because the man who was supposed to protect her took her abuser's side. What's not fair is that she spent 6 weeks being hurt and couldn't tell anyone because you'd convinced her that I wouldn't care and you wouldn't believe her. What's not fair is that you gave a predator $50,000 and then $200,000 more to get him out of jail. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photographs from the hospital. Every bruise, every mark, the petechial hemorrhaging in Isabelle's eyes from being strangled. He looked away, but I held the phone closer. Look at them, Gregory. Look at what you're defending. Look at what your ego and resentment allowed to happen to our daughter. His face crumbled. For the first time since I'd arrived, I saw genuine horror in his eyes. I didn't know it was this bad, because you didn't want to know. You wanted Tristan to be the good guy so desperately that you ignored every sign that he wasn't. What do I do now? His voice was broken, old. You tell the district attorney everything Tristan said to you. Every promise, every manipulation, every lie. You testify against him if necessary, and then you pray that Isabelle can eventually forgive you because I'm not sure I ever will. I left him there, sitting in his sad bachelor condo, finally confronting the reality of what his choices had cost. As I drove home, Victoria called. Dominique, you need to get back here now. James found something on Tristan's phone, something that changes everything. I drove back to my house faster than I should have, my mind racing through possibilities. Victoria's voice had carried an urgency I rarely heard from her. She'd been a litigator for 28 years, and very little rattled her anymore. When I pulled into my driveway, Her car was already there, and James Mitchell's black SUV was parked behind it. They were in my living room, Isabelle between them on the couch, looking pale. Victoria had her laptop open on the coffee table, and James was holding a tablet with what looked like transcripts on the screen. "What did you find?" I asked, setting my purse down. James looked at Isabelle first, then at me. "Are you sure you want to discuss this with your daughter present? Some of this is disturbing." "I want to hear it," Isabelle said firmly. "Whatever it is, I need to know." Victoria gestured for me to sit. James recovered deleted text messages from Tristan's phone, messages between him and someone named Marcus Reeves. They go back 7 months. "Who's Marcus Reeves?" "Another cryptocurrency trader who lost big in the same investments as Tristan. They were working together on what they called recovery strategies." Victoria's voice was tight with controlled anger, which is code for targeting wealthy women to manipulate into relationships and extract money from. I felt ice form in my stomach. This was a plan? From the beginning? James pulled up screenshots on his tablet. The first message is from February 14th, 2 weeks before Tristan met Isabelle. Marcus wrote, "Found you a good target. Name's Isabelle Beaumont, 27, architect, works at Morrison & Klein. Father's Gregory Beaumont, real estate easy mark. Mother is Judge Dominique Beaumont, federal judge, retired, estimated net worth 12 to 15 million. Daughter has trust issues from parents' divorce 4 years ago. Perfect vulnerability." The room spun. They'd researched Isabelle like she was a business transaction. They'd identified her vulnerabilities, calculated her value, planned the approach. Tristan responded, "How do I get an introduction?" James continued. Marcus set it up through the networking event. He knew the organizer, made sure Isabelle was invited, positioned Tristan nearby. The whole meeting was staged. Isabelle made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. I moved to sit beside her, taking her hand. It was freezing. "There's more," Victoria said quietly. Months of messages. Tristan updating Marcus on his progress with Isabelle, asking for advice on how to isolate her from friends, discussing how to approach Gregory for money. "It's all there, Dominique. Every step was calculated." "Show me," I said. Victoria turned the laptop toward me. Message after message scrolled past, a detailed chronicle of Tristan's campaign to manipulate my daughter. March 28th, Tristan. "She's sweet but guarded. Daddy issues for sure. Mentioned her mother is cold, career-obsessed. I can work with that." April 15th, Marcus. "Have you established the emotional dependency yet? You need her to feel like you're the only one who really understands her." April 16th, Tristan. "Working on it. Taking it slow. She's smart. Can't push too hard too fast." May 3rd, Tristan. "Met the father today. Guy's a mess. Bitter about the ex-wife. Desperate to be relevant in daughter's life. Easy manipulation. I played the respectful boyfriend routine, and he ate it up." May 4th, Marcus. "Perfect. Turn him into an ally. When you need to make a move, he'll back your story." June 12th, Tristan. "She tried to make plans with friends this weekend. Had to shut that down. Made her feel guilty about not spending enough time with me. It worked." June 20th, Tristan. "Getting concerned. She's starting to pull back emotionally. Might have pushed the isolation too fast." June 21st, Marcus. "Escalate the commitment. Talk about future, marriage, make her feel like leaving would be abandoning something important, and get money from the father soon. We need liquid assets." July 8th, Tristan. "Got 50K from Gregory. Told him it was an investment opportunity, that I wanted to be able to properly provide for his daughter. He practically threw money at me." July 9th, Marcus. "Good. Now you need to get to the mother. That's where the real money is. Find a way to make her sympathetic to you." July 24th, Tristan. "Isabelle's definitely trying to end things. She said she needs space. I need to pivot to the backup plan." July 25th, Marcus. "Remind her what we discussed. You have the recordings, the father as a witness, the whole setup. If she tries to leave, you flip it on her. Make her the villain. Then you sue the family for damages, emotional distress, defamation, whatever sticks. Rich people pay to make problems go away." I stopped reading. My hands were shaking with rage so pure I could barely see straight. This wasn't just domestic violence. This wasn't even just financial manipulation. This was a criminal conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and assault. "There's a message from the night of the assault," James said quietly. "Do you want to see it?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. He pulled it up. The timestamp was from the night Isabelle called me, sent at 3:07 a.m., 10 minutes after the assault, 7 minutes before Tristan called Gregory, 33 minutes before he called 911. Tristan had to get physical. She was leaving. Grabbed her harder than planned, marks on her neck. Calling the father now to establish she attacked me first. This is going to work. She's too scared to fight back, and Judge Mom will want to settle quietly to avoid scandal. Marcus, be careful. If the mother gets involved legally, you're screwed. Tristan, that's why I need the father solid. She won't go against both parents, and I have the recordings as insurance. Victoria closed the laptop. He was so confident that you'd want to avoid publicity, that you'd pay him to go away quietly. He didn't know you at all. No, I said. He knew Judge Dominique Beaumont, the public figure. He didn't know me as Isabelle's mother. That was his mistake. Isabelle was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. None of it was real. Not one moment. He never cared about me at all. I pulled her close. I know, baby. I know. All those things he said about understanding me, about loving me despite my flaws, it was all lies. Every conversation, every laugh, every time he made me feel special, he was following a script. Yes, and I'm so sorry. How did I not see it? How was I so stupid? You weren't stupid. You were human. These men, they're professionals at this. They study manipulation the way you study architecture, and they specifically target people with vulnerabilities they can exploit. None of this is your fault. James cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Marcus Reeves has done this before. I found 3 other cases over the past 6 years where he helped other men target wealthy women. 1 case in Connecticut, 1 in Florida, 1 in New York. In each case, the relationship ended with either the woman paying a settlement or the man extracting money through other means before disappearing. The women never pressed charges because they were embarrassed, or because the men had evidence that made them look bad, or because their families convinced them to let it go quietly. How much did they get away with? Victoria asked. Total? Probably close to $2 million over 6 years. They've perfected this system. Target, manipulate, extract, move on. I stood up, my mind already working through the legal implications. We're not letting them get away with this. Not anymore. This is fraud, conspiracy, attempted extortion, assault, and probably a dozen other charges I can think of. Victoria, call Robert Morrison. I want every charge possible filed against both Tristan and Marcus. Already on it. But Dominique, there's a problem. The messages show planning and intent, but a good defense attorney could argue that Tristan genuinely developed feelings for Isabelle, that the relationship evolved beyond the original plan. They could claim the assault was a legitimate moment of mutual combat, and that everything else is just 2 guys talking tough. Not with the message sent after the assault. That shows premeditation for the false police report. That shows intent to extort. And combined with the pattern from previous victims, it shows a criminal enterprise. We'd need the other victims to testify, and we'd need Marcus Reeves in custody. Then find him, I said to James. Use whatever resources you need. I want him arrested by end of day. James nodded and left. Victoria stayed, making calls to the DA's office, to the FBI. This crossed state lines, which made it federal. My jurisdiction, my world. Over the next 6 hours, everything moved fast. Marcus Reeves was located in Las Vegas and arrested on a federal warrant. The 3 previous victims were contacted, and 2 agreed to testify. The 3rd had died 2 years ago. Suicide, her family said, after a relationship that had destroyed her emotionally and financially. That information hit me hard. These men had literally killed someone with their manipulation, and they just kept going. How many other women were out there who hadn't reported? How many had paid quietly, suffered silently, carried the shame of being foolish enough to fall for it? The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 10 days out. Robert Morrison personally took the case, and he was building it like a RICO prosecution. Organized criminal activity with a pattern of fraud and extortion. Tristan's bail was revoked when the new charges were filed. Gregory tried to post it again, but Victoria had already filed a civil action freezing any further financial transactions between them pending investigation. I went to visit Tristan in jail 3 days before the hearing. Victoria advised against it, said there was nothing to gain, but I needed to see him, needed to look in the eyes of the man who'd terrorized my daughter and tried to destroy her. They brought him into the visitor's room in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing without his expensive clothes and practiced charm. When he saw me sitting there, his expression flickered. Just for a moment, I saw fear. Good. Judge Beaumont, he said, sitting down across from me with the plexiglass between us. I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to understand something, I said calmly. My daughter is a good person, kind, talented, empathetic. She's never hurt anyone in her life. So I'm trying to comprehend what kind of person specifically targets someone like that for destruction. He smiled, and it was the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. Cold, empty. It's just business, Your Honor, nothing personal. Business. You call manipulating someone's emotions, isolating them from their support system, assaulting them, and attempting extortion? You call that business? I call it recognizing opportunity and having the intelligence to capitalize on it. Your daughter had resources I needed. I provided companionship and attention she wanted. It was a transaction. Except she thought it was love. That's not my problem. People believe what they want to believe. I just gave them a story they found compelling. I studied him carefully. No remorse, no recognition that he'd done anything wrong. He genuinely saw women as resources to be exploited, emotions as tools to be manipulated. This wasn't just criminality, it was sociopathy. You made a mistake, I said quietly. When you planned this, you thought you knew who I was. You researched Judge Dominique Beaumont, saw the public figure, the professional reputation. You thought I'd want to avoid scandal, that I'd pay you to go away quietly. Wouldn't you have? If I'd gotten to you before the assault, presented evidence of Isabelle's instability, offered to end the relationship quietly for the right price, wouldn't you have considered it? No. Because you didn't know me as Isabelle's mother. You didn't know that I'd spent 22 years putting men exactly like you in prison. You didn't know that I'd dedicated my career to making sure women had justice when men tried to destroy them. And you certainly didn't know that I'd use every single resource, connection, and piece of knowledge I've accumulated over decades to ensure you never do this to anyone else. His smile faded slightly. The charges won't all stick. My lawyer says, your lawyer is wrong. You're going to prison for a very long time, Tristan. And Marcus is going with you. And I'm going to make sure every woman you've both hurt gets justice. Not just financial restitution, but the acknowledgement that they were victims of a crime, not fools who made bad choices. This is personal for you. That's going to be a problem in court. I'm not prosecuting you. Robert Morrison is. I'm just a mother who's going to sit in the gallery every single day and watch you face the consequences of your actions. And then I'm going to use this case as the foundation for my foundation's work, training law enforcement to recognize these patterns, teaching women the warning signs, making sure what you did to my daughter and those other women becomes harder for the next predator to accomplish. I stood to leave. He called after me. She really did love me, you know. At least at first. Before I got bored with the act, that part was real from her side. I turned back. I know. That's what makes what you did so unforgivable. You took someone's genuine love and trust and weaponized it. You're not just a criminal, Tristan. You're a parasite. And now you're going to spend the next decade in a cell thinking about the fact that you destroyed your own life because you underestimated a mother's love for her daughter. I left him there and didn't look back. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat in the gallery every single day, watching Robert Morrison methodically dismantle Tristan's defense. The text messages were devastating evidence, a roadmap of predation that no amount of charm or tears could explain away. Marcus Reeves took a plea deal on day 5, agreeing to testify against Tristan in exchange for a reduced sentence. Watching him describe their system, the way they'd perfected targeting vulnerable women over years, made my stomach turn. The previous victims testified. Sarah Chen described how Tristan had isolated her from her family while she grieved her mother. Amanda Price explained how he'd stolen her laptop and phone, how she'd lost job opportunities because he'd sabotaged her professionally. And then there was testimony from the family of Rebecca Morrison, the woman who'd killed herself 2 years ago. Her sister read letters Rebecca had written but never sent, describing how a man named T had destroyed her sense of reality, taken her money, and left her feeling like she was worthless. Isabelle testified on day 12. I watched my daughter walk to the stand with her head high, wearing a navy suit I'd bought her for her first job interview. She was terrified. I could see it in the way her hands shook when she was sworn in, but her voice was steady. She described the 8 months of manipulation, the gradual isolation, the moment when love turned to fear. When Robert asked her to describe the assault, she looked directly at Tristan and recounted every detail without flinching. He put his hands around my neck and squeezed until I couldn't breathe, she said clearly. I thought I was going to die. And when I finally got away and called the police, he called my father first to make sure no one would believe me. Tristan's attorney tried to shake her on cross-examination, suggested she'd been emotionally unstable, that she'd misinterpreted affection as control. Isabelle didn't break. I'm not unstable, she said firmly. I'm a survivor of a calculated crime. There's a difference. Gregory testified too, though not willingly. Victoria had subpoenaed him, and he looked 20 years older walking into that courtroom. He admitted giving Tristan $50,000, posting his bail, initially supporting his story. When Robert asked why, Gregory's voice cracked. Because I wanted to believe I mattered. Because Tristan made me feel relevant in my daughter's life, in a way I hadn't felt since the divorce. And because, he paused, looking at Isabelle in the gallery, because I was so angry at my ex-wife that I let that anger blind me to the truth. I chose my ego over my daughter's safety, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. It was the most honest thing I'd heard Gregory say in 10 years. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Tristan guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted extortion, assault with intent to cause great bodily harm, strangulation, filing a false police report. The judge, a colleague of mine named Patricia Chen, no relation to Detective Marcus Chen, scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. I didn't attend the sentencing. Isabelle did, with Victoria beside her. She told me later that Tristan showed no emotion when he received 14 years in federal prison. Marcus got 8 years for his cooperation. It wasn't enough. No sentence ever is when someone's stolen years of someone else's life. But it was something. Justice. Imperfect, but real. 3 months after the trial ended, Isabelle moved back into her own apartment. Not the one she'd shared time in with Tristan. She couldn't go back there. A new place in Pasadena, closer to her office, with better light for the painting she'd started doing again. I helped her move in, and we spent the afternoon unpacking boxes and ordering takeout. I'm starting therapy next week, she told me as we assembled her bookshelf. Not just trauma counseling, but regular therapy. To work through everything, the relationship with Tristan, the divorce, my relationship with you and Dad. That's good, I said. I started therapy too, about a month ago. She looked up, surprised. You did? I realized I've spent 30 years building walls to protect myself from other people's trauma, and those walls kept out the people I love too. I need to learn how to be strong and vulnerable at the same time. It's harder than sentencing criminals, I'll be honest. She laughed, and it was the first real laugh I'd heard from her since before everything happened. Mom admitting something is hard. I should record this. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Isabelle said quietly, I'm still angry at Dad. I don't know if I'll ever forgive him completely. That's your right. He made his choices, and you get to decide what relationship you want with him going forward. He's been asking to see you, but I told him only when you're ready. I know. He sends me emails every week, long ones, apologizing, explaining. I read them, but I don't respond. She paused. Do you think people can really change? Like, fundamentally? I thought about Gregory, about the man he'd been when we met versus who he'd become. About Tristan and Marcus and all the abusers I'd sentenced who'd claimed they'd change and rarely did. About myself, slowly learning to tear down walls I'd spent decades building. I think people can change if they genuinely want to and are willing to do the work, I said carefully. But wanting to change because you got caught and face consequences isn't the same as wanting to change because you recognize you've hurt people you love. Your father is somewhere in between right now. Whether he gets to genuine change is up to him. What about us? She asked. Are we changing? We're trying. That's different from before. Before, we just accepted the distance as permanent. Now, we're actively working to close it. That's change. She nodded, considering this. Then, I'm glad you were there, Mom. At the police station, at the trial, through everything. I spent so long thinking you were too busy or too important to care about my problems, and then when it mattered most, you were just there. I'm sorry I wasn't there before it got to that point. I'm sorry I let work consume me so much that you felt like you couldn't reach out. I'm sorry, too. For believing Dad's narrative about you for so long. For not seeing that his bitterness was poisoning how I saw you. We finished the bookshelf and stood back to look at it. It was slightly crooked, but it held books, and that was enough. My foundation launched 2 months later. We called it the Rebecca Morrison Foundation, after the woman who'd taken her life, the one whose story had never been told until the trial. We focused on 3 things: training law enforcement to recognize patterns of financial and emotional manipulation in domestic violence cases, providing resources for women to identify warning signs of predatory relationships, and offering legal support for victims who wanted to prosecute but feared they wouldn't be believed. Detective Marcus Chen became one of our first instructors. He'd been devastated by how badly he'd mishandled Isabelle's case initially, and he channeled that into becoming an expert on the biases that make police dismiss women's complaints. He was good at it. Former cops listen to other cops in ways they don't listen to judges or advocates. Victoria joined as general counsel, working part-time. She'd seen too many cases like Isabelle's over her career, women who'd been manipulated and then blamed for it. She wanted to make sure the legal system worked better for the next generation. 6 months after the trial, I got a letter from Sarah Chen, one of Tristan's previous victims. She wrote that watching the trial, seeing Tristan held accountable, had helped her finally process what had happened to her. She'd started therapy. She'd told her family the real story of that relationship instead of the sanitized version she'd given them before. She was healing. That letter meant more to me than any commendation I'd received in 22 years on the bench. Isabelle and I have dinner together every Thursday now. Sometimes we talk about serious things, therapy breakthroughs, difficult memories, ongoing healing. Sometimes we just talk about her work, my foundation, the new restaurant that opened downtown. We're learning each other again, discovering who we are now instead of who we were during the marriage and divorce. Gregory and Isabelle are in family therapy together. I don't know if they'll rebuild their relationship, but they're trying. He's different now, quieter, more careful with his words, genuinely remorseful. He sold his condo and moved to a smaller place, donated $100,000 to the foundation as a start on making amends. It doesn't fix what he did, but it's acknowledgement. Last week, Isabelle got promoted to senior architect at her firm. She called me immediately, excited and proud. We went to dinner to celebrate, and she told me about the project she's leading, a women's shelter with thoughtful design elements to help residents feel safe and dignified. I want to build things that help people heal, she said. Spaces that acknowledge trauma, but don't let it define everything. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, I told her. You're taking what happened and transforming it into something that helps others. That's the best kind of revenge, becoming someone who makes the world better despite what people tried to do to you. She smiled, and in that smile I saw the girl she'd been before Tristan, but also someone stronger, someone who'd been broken and had chosen to heal instead of staying broken, someone who'd learned that surviving isn't the same as thriving, but both are valid and both take courage. I love you, Mom, she said. I love you too, baby. We're not perfect. We still have hard days, difficult conversations, moments where old patterns threaten to resurface. But we're here, together, doing the work. And that's everything. That's justice, too. Not just the kind that happens in courtrooms with gavels and sentences, but the kind that happens in kitchens over coffee, in therapy sessions, in the slow, deliberate choice to heal and rebuild and refuse to let predators define your story. Tristan took 8 months of my daughter's life, but he didn't get to take her future. That belongs to her, and she's building something beautiful with it. And I get to be there to watch.